The details surrounding air travel are involved and frequently change, and there are many terms and concepts with which to become familiar. There are some important differences between domestic and international air travel. We will begin by exploring domestic air travel, which includes travel within the continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and parts of Canada. Let's start with a brief look at the history of the airline industry. Before 1978, the government regulated the airlines. In 1938, the Civil Aeronautics Authority was formed to regulate this new industry. The CAA was reorganized as the Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB. In 1958, the FAA was established basically to oversee safety. The FAA later became part of the Department of Transportation. In 1967, the NTSB was formed to investigate accidents involving aircraft. 1978 marked an important year in the airline industry. This was the year when the Airline Deregulation Act ended the government's economic control of U.S. airlines. Airlines now have control of their own fares, routes, and commissions. However, especially since 9/11, the government has become more active in overseeing airport security and continues to certify commercial pilots, oversee maintenance programs and procedures for all aircraft, and certifies the airworthiness of planes. Deregulation of the airline industry had major effects on the airlines, the flying public, and travel agencies. What were some of these effects? Speaking of airlines, some new ones started up, some merged, and some went out of business. Competition between airlines increased, but so did alliances and code sharing. Fare wars began. Fares changed more often, and the number of different fares increased. Because fares were so difficult to keep up with, the computer reservation system grew. The hub and spoke system increased efficiency and helped fill planes. The flying public generally benefited, at least economically, from deregulation as competition between airlines increased and more people could afford to fly. However, the hub and spoke system becoming more popular, service to some cities was reduced. Other cities saw increased service. Hub and spoke also resulted in more connecting flights, but greater frequency of flights, at least for some routes. As airfares became more complicated, travel agencies were needed to help sell tickets and explain the rules, and the ARC was established to regulate the distribution of airline tickets. Previously, fares were published a few times a year in the OAG, the Official Airline Guide, a huge printed book that contained all of the fares. With frequently changing fares, this was no longer efficient, and the computer reservation system became a necessary tool for air reservations. More recent effects of deregulation include consolidation of airlines, worldwide alliances, and increased code sharing, and a crop of budget airlines, some of which have had great success, some not. In 1995, the airlines began cutting commissions for ticket sales. In order to be successful, travel agencies and travel professionals had to rethink their way of doing business. Eventually, some travel counselors stopped selling air tickets or funneled air reservations to a designated consultant, typically a corporate agent. An agency started charging service fees for booking air. Agencies consolidated, and some traditional brick and mortar agencies closed. As the number of traditional agencies lessened, the number of independent or home-based travel professionals increased. Regardless of whether you sell air or not, it's still important to be familiar with air travel in order to advise and help our clients. Today, the major regulatory organizations are the Department of Transportation, the FAA, the TSA, and the NTSB. The ARC is another organization that you should be familiar with. The Air Transport Association, ATA, a trade or association of major U.S. airlines, which changed its name to Airlines for America in 2011, created the ARC, or Airlines Reporting Corporation, in 1984. The ARC accredits travel agencies, setting the requirements that allow a travel agency to sell airline tickets. Two terms that you should understand are interline agreements and code sharing agreements. Interline agreements are operational agreements where airlines agree, among other things, to use a standard ticket to list flights of different carriers and cooperate to transfer bags when a connection is made between different airlines. For example, if you book two different airlines getting to your destination and they do not have interline agreements, you will personally have to transfer any checked bags from one airline to the other. Another important term to know is code sharing agreements, which are marketing agreements between different airlines to share the same two-letter airline code for marketing purposes. For example, you may book a fare on a flight coded as a Delta flight, but you may actually fly on a KLM plane. Travel sellers are required to tell clients in writing which airline they are actually flying on. International flights have different guidelines and rules than domestic flights. In 1944, 52 nations signed the Freedoms of the Air, which provides the basis for negotiations among nations about how their airlines will operate. Over the years, much of the negotiations about international air traffic have occurred through IATA, the International Air Transport Association, an association of many international airlines. However, governments must ultimately approve the decisions of IATA and may make their own bilateral agreements. In addition, open skies agreements between nations allow carriers to fly where they choose, charge what they wish, and make deals with each other. IATAN is a subsidiary of IATA. In the U.S., IATAN appoints U.S. travel agencies to sell tickets for international airlines that service the U.S. IATAN also issues an industry-recognized card to identify bona fide travel professionals. You must meet certain requirements to get an IATAN card. Concerning the topic of airlines and airports, let's talk about the different types of airlines in the U.S. We have major, national, and regional carriers, with regional carriers also referred to as commuter airlines. Regional lines are usually owned by major airlines or have code sharing agreements with them. Most routes these days are hub and spoke, which became popular after deregulation. Airlines now have hub cities with feeder routes to smaller destinations. This design maximizes passenger loads for the airlines, but it results in more connecting flights for passengers and may decrease competition among airlines, especially for smaller cities, which may lead to higher fares. Let's talk about airports. Public authorities own major airports, with gates being leased by the airlines. Recently, airports have started to market their services, which may include specialty restaurants, spa services, yoga rooms, play areas for kids, free Wi-Fi, and more. And as most of us are keenly aware, airport security tightened considerably after 9/11. And have you ever wondered about those three-letter codes that get tagged on your luggage when you check it? Some of those codes make perfect sense, as they are often the first letters of the city they serve. The same code may be used for the city itself, if the city has one major airport. However, if the city has multiple major airports, then the city code may be different from the airport codes. For example, the city code for New York is NYC, which has 3 major airports. Sometimes the airport and city codes make little sense unless you know the name of the airport itself, or its former name. And there are still more terms related to air travel. A flight is how the plane flies from one city to another. Flights may be non-stop with no stops and no plane change, direct with stops but no plane change, or connecting with stops and plane changes. If your connection involves only one airline, it's called an online connection. If it involves more than one airline, it's called an offline or interline connection. A journey is the pattern of the entire itinerary. A one-way journey is continuous travel in one direction. A round trip is where both your outbound and return flights mirror each other. A circle trip involves two or more stopovers and returns to the originating city. An open jaw journey involves a non-air segment or returning to a different city other than the originating city. In the previous slide, I mentioned the term stopover. You should know the difference between a stopover and a connection. A connection for a domestic flight is a stop of less than 4 hours at an intermediate point. If the stop is more than 4 hours, unless there's no quicker connection available, then it is a stopover, and the fare will usually be higher. Fares also vary by class of service. In general, for longer flights, there will be first class, a business class, and coach or economy class. These classes may have slight variations or be called different names, and some shorter flights and budget carriers will have only one or two classes. You may also see some airlines charging additional fees for the more desirable seats within coach class. The same type of aircraft may be configured in different ways. Some airlines pack in as many seats as possible by varying the pitch, basically the legroom, and the width of their seats. There are no seats in front of the bulkhead rows, so you will have lots of legroom, but trays will be fitted into the armrest and there will be no seat back video screens or under-seat storage. Wide-body aircraft such as the Boeing 767 have 2 aisles, while narrow-body aircraft such as the 737 have only 1 aisle. If a regional or commuter carrier is part of the itinerary, it pays to check if it is a jet, a turboprop, or a propeller aircraft. Clients may prefer not to travel on a propeller aircraft. Baggage rules and charges differ, depending on the airline and sometimes on the route. Make sure you check the weight and size limits for checked bags and carry-ons, as well as extra charges for sporting equipment or overweight or oversized baggage. Although lost baggage is rare and some airlines actually provide the ability to track your own luggage, you can check the compensation for a lost or delayed bag, or it's usually included in trip insurance. Other airline services to know about include if there are advanced seat assignments and your client's preference, how boarding passes are issued, printed or electronic, what assistance is provided for disabled travelers, rules and charges for traveling with a pet, traveling with an infant, and the ages and rules for minor children flying alone. These services will vary depending on the airline, so check the airline website or give a call if you can't find the information.